Hello, Nicholas the Bard Andrea here from Enkindle Academy, and I wanted to share with you my most recent blog post in a more conversational tone called Why Meeting Materialism in Education Matters. This is a topic that is near and dear to my heart. And it's because materialism is woven into the fabric of society. We find it around every corner. It's in our economics, it's in the way we, idolize the famous, and perhaps most pervasively, it's in our science and medicine. It also seeps into our education and in the, I would say, necessary separation of church and state that we have in the United States. Materialism unfortunately becomes the de facto assumption in curricula across the nation. Is this a good thing? Is it a bad thing? Perhaps, as I will argue, it's an incomplete thing. So let's get into this. So first of all, what is materialism, or what do we mean by materialism? I call materialism the worldview that says nothing exists besides matter. We can put it another way by saying if we can't see it and measure it, it doesn't exist. Now, let's be clear about something, that this preoccupation with sensory reality and this drive to control every atom and particle of the physical world has produced marvelous things for the world, like airplanes, one of my favorite things, air conditioning, the ability to research hostile environments like Antarctica. It's also produced life-saving medical treatments and given us greater crop yields and stuff like that, among many other benefits. Nobody would deny that life is more comfortable and perhaps predictable than it's ever been before, and we owe this to materialism and materialistic science. But on the other hand, the question is, what other effects does this materialism have, and particularly on your child and his or her education? Let's say your daughter's teacher is a materialist. He or she would look at your daughter and say, well, your daughter is nothing but a body. All of her impulses to act, her feelings, and her thoughts are nothing but material processes. In fact, she came about arbitrarily, without any meaning or purpose. Your daughter, and indeed all human beings like her, are really nothing but a happy accident at best. Now, you can stop and think about how you would feel about that. But, I'm going to let that be your experience here. Let's, understand these assertions, what they're based on. So I would say that these assertions are, at least in part, based on Darwinian, or what we would call neo-Darwinian, observations and reasoning, as well as brain scans, which show that certain areas of the brain light up when we have certain conscious experiences. Furthermore, materialists use experiments like the Miller-Urey experiments from the 1950s to argue that no intelligence was ever involved in the creation and expression, the formation of the universe. So that was a very interesting experiment because what they did is they set up methane, hydrogen, ammonia, and a kind of atmosphere of water vapor, a very carefully curated set of conditions, and then they shot electric sparks through the mixture. And what they noticed is that amino acids, which are the building blocks of life, started to appear. And so materialists use this experiment to show or to suggest that life could form literally out of nothing, totally happenstance, totally arbitrarily. And examples like these have become the basis of materialism, which inevitably has trickled down into education. All right. So here's the thing. Here's the question. Is materialism true? And the answer is yes. In a certain sense. Materialism often correctly describes the processes happening at what I call the tip of the iceberg of reality. For example, I can describe how an aircraft functions, how it flies, how it stays in the air, how it goes up, how it comes down, without needing to appeal to souls and spirits or anything like that. I could also give you I wouldn't do it, a doctor would do it, give you antibiotics to treat strep throat. In both of these cases, the mechanisms of matter and those things that are clearly observable are all pretty clear. However, there are some important questions that materialism fails to answer. First, in the Miller-Urey experiment, materialists neglect a vital detail in their conclusion. They seem to forget that intelligent agents set up the design of the experiments. It was human beings, scientists, who arranged those conditions to be ideal for amino acids to form from the interaction of the various elements with the electricity. So, because of that fact, materialists can't actually use the Miller-Urey experiment to argue out intelligence in the work of creation, because in that experiment, intelligence was clearly at play. Now, that doesn't necessarily refute that life arose arbitrarily out of nothing, just that such experiments can't be used to prove materialism because their conclusions leave out critical parts of the experiment. You can't leave out the experimenters. Secondly, with regards to the brain scans, right? This idea that the brain creates consciousness. Unfortunately, those experiments, as far as I can tell, don't prove that the brain creates consciousness and that no consciousness ever exists outside the brain. What they demonstrate is that there is a correlation between conscious activity expressing in the material world and things happening in the brain. It's a bit of a chicken and egg problem, I'd have to say, and it becomes more problematic when it serves as one of the bases for materialism in education. I'm not going to get into it, but there are thousands of anecdotal stories from the world's many cultures and traditions that provide evidence to the contrary of the whole the brain creates consciousness theory. But like I said, I'm not even going to go into those. Because there is a philosophical challenge to materialism in education, or just in general. It's something that doesn't actually need the fancy experiments of laboratories to demonstrate that reality is not just a tip, but a whole iceberg as well. Okay? So, I want you to follow me on a short journey here. But before we do, I just want to make a few other points here. First of all, another argument that materialists make is that, well, we've never measured a soul or a spirit. And it's like, well, if you're confining yourself to material instruments to measure such things, then how could something material measure something immaterial? At best, it could measure the effects of the immaterial in the material, like the brain scans, the EEG machines. But for example, those readings, those EEG readings, don't actually measure the quality of a thought, only its quantity, if you will. Only its, the sort of the quantity of its brain waves. Okay? An EEG reading is not the same as measuring a thought itself. Okay? It's only measuring how that thought is causing neurons to fire. Okay, so now this journey. It's a philosophical journey. Maybe a little challenging, but just try it here. So materialists say that only matter exists, and that even thoughts themselves are nothing but just purely material. They extend this by saying that thought arises as an emergent property of matter, and like everything else, not for any reason or purpose, no teleology, just cause. But to be able to say all of these things, to be able to make these assertions that the brain creates consciousness or whatever, thinking must first be present. To even be able to say anything about matter, you're already presupposing thinking. I can't conceive of matter, reason, purpose, emergence, intelligence, or the lack thereof without first thinking. So the argument becomes circular in the end. It's like saying, well, consciousness cannot exist without matter because matter creates consciousness. Which I don't remember all my philosophical terms, but I think that's a tautology. It's a fallacy, all right? The next problem here is that why would matter want to become self-conscious and seek to understand itself in the first place? Why isn't it content just to go on being inanimate? Darwinians and neo-Darwinians explain that all change is driven merely by the need to survive. However, the desire to understand the nature of reality, of the self, of consciousness, of thinking, of the material universe, these things are not necessary for survival. They are superfluous. So, if matter is all there is, and there is no meaning, purpose, nor teleology in the universe, then why should I, or anybody else, as purely material beings, care at all? For that matter, why should materialists care even to understand materialism? These fundamental questions are materialism is utterly in the dark in its ability to address. So, I'm going to talk about an alternative to materialism, and then we'll talk about overcoming it. Okay. So the materialist argument collapses under its own weight for a simple reason, and that is because it forgets that it's thinking. It considers only outer physical sensory facts and ignores this whole other set of facts contained in thinking. Put another way, materialism ignores the thinker. It tries to argue it away. Now, while this outer obsession with matter has given us airplanes and advanced medical technology and some other great things, it has also hollowed out the human soul. It's hollowed out the inner life of human beings who, it seems, need more than materialistic thoughts to feel fulfilled and complete. And if you're not convinced about that, you can check out my posts that I've written on the meaning crisis and mental health issues in youth, amongst others. Now, Rudolf Steiner's philosophy of freedom presents an alternative view that doesn't even require religion. I'm not telling people to get religion here. I'm just talking about reality. So Steiner explains that reality consists of concept on the one hand and percept on the other hand. The latter is what objects give to us externally visible to the senses, the percepts. Okay? Like the percepts of a tree, the bark, the color, the form, all of that, right? The height and everything. The former part, the concept, is what those objects give to the non-physical part of us, you could say, to the thinker. And as Steiner argues, the concept of a tree, for example, is no less real than the percept of its bark and branches and leaves and stuff. And so in the same way, the inner reality of your child before a teacher is no less real to that teacher than his or her physical expression, physical characteristics. That outer picture of them and the inner sort of concept of them, if you will, come together to form the whole of who your child is. And that's something that a teacher should be looking for every time they look at your child. So one side of reality meets the senses, and the other side of reality meets the intuition. And the truthfulness of this picture can be verified with just a little conscious thought, as I've implored you to do here. So this ability to think, that is, this ability to exercise what is non-physical in us, is exactly where education has failed now for decades, right? Is it any wonder that we have so many unquestioning materialists these days? I dare say they have become religious and they don't even know it. We can even call their religion materialistic scientism. Yeah? Which, by the way, is not a denial of the scientific method, which is critically important in finding reality. It's just the assumptions, the dogmatic assumptions that it can lead to. All right, so how do we overcome this materialism in education? So let's start where it most firmly takes root, in science. Okay? So, if we believe thinkers like Steiner and Aquinas and Aristotle and other great thinkers like them, we will see this world as a merger of concept and percept. And so within each phenomenon and being that we meet, there is a teleology, there is an informing principle at work. If we look at an acorn, for example, and we observe it over time to become a tree, we can reason backwards that the teleology or purpose of the acorn was to become the tree. This phenomenological approach to science is exactly what we do here at Enkindle Academy. We don't use textbooks where principles are just given to students without having them exert their own inner faculties. We start with observing the phenomena themselves, like the acorn, or like light refracting through a prism, or combining the vinegar and baking soda and seeing what happens. And then, after that, after the observation, we recall the details. And then after that, we put it to sleep. And the next day, we see what bubbles up as understanding. In this process, we use the will in the form of direct observation, the feeling, which is to recall our observations and pictures, and thinking, which is the understanding that comes, right, in that order. And so students develop the ability to think intuitively into the phenomena of the world. They discover for themselves the concepts clothed in percepts. And why does this matter so much? Because the future depends on it. In a debate I was having with somebody recently, he told me that he felt that materialism was the thing saving the world. I could only wonder if he was being serious or joking. No doubt materialism has solved many problems, but how many more has it caused? It's due to materialism that the environment's in dire straits, that chronic disease is at an all-time high, that we have so much abundance and yet so much poverty. Do I need to rattle off more reasons? No, materialism is not saving the planet, it's destroying it. Now, this same individual I was debating with blamed all the problems of the world on dogmatic religion, and no doubt, that also causes a lot of problems. Yet, the materialists fail to recognize that they have become just as dogmatic as the medieval religious fanatics they arose to oppose. Dogma of all kinds is problematic. The problem with the materialists is that they don't see how their religion, how their dogma has become a kind of religion to be counted amongst those they so vociferously react against. Now, as I said, there's nothing wrong with the scientific method. In fact, it is critical to examine reality in a systematic, grounded, and unbiased way. The problem is when we limit our assumptions to only what can be perceived physically, we focus only on the tip and deny the whole rest of the iceberg. We need a holistic science of the whole iceberg, lest we repeat some of the gross errors of the past century and a half, like the Bolshevik Revolution, amongst others, right? Anthroposophy provides us with such a science. There are others as well. There's tantric science. Those are the two that really stick out to me. And we would do well to base our education on this holistic, one could say, holistic science, I'll call it that. Okay? All right, great. So that's what I wanted to talk about today. I do want to just offer that Enkindle Academy can help your child, can also help you as an educator, if you're a homeschool educator or even a teacher. We offer pre-recorded and live lessons for students in grades 5 through 9. We teach all academic subjects, plus some fine arts, creative writing, and an empowerment group for adolescents. We also offer one-on-one tutoring for all academic subjects, including fine arts. And you can go to our website for more information about that. The link is down below. And please, if you like this video, remember to subscribe, because that really helps us get the word out to more people. All right. Take care. Bye.